The Kansas City Chiefs just re-signed slash extended offensive center Creed Humphrey for a 4-year extension. And I've got some thoughts on what it means, not just for Creed Humphrey, not just for the Chiefs this season, but what it really could mean playing into the long-term strategy for the Kansas City Chiefs, for the draft, for free agency, etc. But before we get into all that, what has happened here? Creed Humphrey is now a Kansas City Chief through at least the 2028 season, having just signed a 4-year extension worth $72 million, and $50 million of those dollars are guaranteed. Now, some thoughts on that real quick. Number one, this will reset the offensive center market. This is the biggest deal for an offensive center in the NFL. It is argued, I would say rightfully so, that Creed Humphrey is the best center in the NFL. So this, I believe, resets the offensive center market by about $4 million per season on average. I don't think we have the exact numbers for this deal yet. There is going to be uh, a lot to be looked into as far as that is concerned, because what the Kansas City Chiefs have been able to do with most of their players is work their contract in a way that benefits the team. And I have to believe that Creed Humphrey is going to play along with that. Now, this number being $4 million above the next offensive center in the league is interesting, and I don't think it is all that big a deal, because what we have seen is that the projections say that the salary cap in the NFL is going to extend fairly rapidly. So by the time Creed Humphrey gets to that final deal, that final year of this deal, it's going to look like an absolute bargain for the Kansas City Chiefs, especially when teams are signing centers half the skill of Creed Humphrey to deals that look like this. The next thing that is notable here, Creed Humphrey already has 2 Super Bowl rings. Creed Humphrey has started since his rookie season. You are looking at your newest Chiefs Ring of Honor member. This is an interesting perspective to have, because this means that Creed Humphrey is going to be the offensive center for the Kansas City Chiefs for at least 8 years, a decade. Barring, catastrophe, obviously, but looking at it from the middle standpoint, it is interesting to see a development like this for a guy like Creed Humphrey, when you can clearly project that he is going to have his name in the rafters at Arrowhead Stadium, or whatever you call where the Ring of Honor is on the stadium at Arrowhead. I refuse to call it Geha Field. So, yeah, it's just interesting to have that perspective for this, because undoubtedly he will have his name up there. Now, the next line of questioning here, I think, has to be Nick Bolton and Trey Smith. Both of these players are from the very same draft class. Can the Chiefs re-sign all of them? I don't know. I'm not 100% sure on this. If look, I'm as big a Trey Smith fan as there is. I'm as big a Nick Bolton fan as there is. Hashtag hit stick Nick. I don't know that either of these players are as irreplaceable as Creed Humphrey. Nick Bolton is running into problems staying on the field lately. Trey Smith, as much as I love him, he seems to be here's the thing. Trey Smith, you look at his game and you think, well, his weakness is going to be pass blocking. And I think evidently sometimes it is. Here's the question I have. Creed Humphrey, best center in football. Joe Thuney, one of the best left guards in football. Trey Smith, I think of him as one of the better right guards in the NFL. How come the Kansas City Chiefs can't run up the middle? So I'm not blaming that on Trey Smith. I don't think anyone would blame that on Creed Humphrey. I don't know what the answer is. But I think that there are questions to be had as to whether or not either Nick Bolton or Trey Smith, both Nick Bolton and Trey Smith, end up being re signed to the Kansas City Chiefs. And I am not the person whose pay grade allows that decision making. I would love to see both of them be Kansas City Chiefs for their career. I think someone will be willing to pay Nick Bolton a lot of money to leave Kansas City, in my belief. And I think that Trey Smith is going to be in that same boat. Do they want to continue playing for the Kansas City Chiefs and the ability to win Super Bowls? That's going to be the question for them. What is that worth versus getting paid the big bucks? Because for all of the problems that both of them have, Nick Bolton staying on the field, Nick Bolton a little bit in coverage, Trey Smith, whatever holes there are in his game, Trey Smith a little bit getting called for penalties, right? They're going to be an upgrade for someone. So I don't know exactly what the future holds for these two guys. I think that a week ago, anyone would have said that of that trio, Creed Humphrey was the most likely to get a big deal. Will either of these other players, Nick Bolton or Trey Smith, get a big deal? I don't know, especially if we're talking about from the Kansas City Chiefs, especially if we're talking about from the Kansas City Chiefs as they are trying to continue. They're going to have to build through the draft. They're going to have to rebuild through the draft. That is something that Brett Veach has made very clear, and it's something that Brett Veach has proven capable of doing. Now, big picture. The big picture deal with this is that there is more stability on the offensive line today than there was yesterday. Now, how can that be? Creed Humphrey was already the starting offensive center for the Kansas City Chiefs. How can it be that simply by re signing him, there is more stability on the offensive line than had there been? Well, because the offensive line is hard. The offensive line has struggled for a very long time. We are seeing the offensive line continue to struggle at the offensive tackle position. And look, how long has the offensive line struggled? It's worth remembering when Andy Reid came to Kansas City, his first pick was Eric Fisher. You don't just happen to pick a left tackle, number one overall, without having definitive problems on the offensive line. It's hard to remember a decade plus ago at this point, but that's the truth. The offensive line was a real mess before then, and it's going to remain difficult to build an offensive line so long as the Kansas City Chiefs are going deep into the playoffs every season, as long as the Kansas City Chiefs are winning double-digit games every season. And I don't think any of us see that ending anytime soon, so long as Patrick Mahomes is pulling the trigger in Kansas City. So, well, I'll get to the big idea about that with the last point in this video, because I think that this it's necessary to set this up first. Trey Smith is in the final year of his contract. We just talked about that a little bit. Joe Thuney will play 2024 and 2025 is on his contract, though his contract is pretty big. I don't see the Kansas City Chiefs moving on from him. I think that it's just too prohibitive. I think it's just too prohibitive. So what the Kansas City Chiefs get is a season this year, unless Trey Smith is re-signed and extended sometime in the next few months, right, as long as the season is going. The Chiefs get a year to see if Mike Caliendo / Hunter Norzad and or C.J. Hansen can take the guard spots surrounding Creed Humphrey at center. You get a little bit beyond that, and you realize that between Wanye Morris and Kingsley Suamataia and Jawan Taylor, the Chiefs, I think, probably have at least a couple years of starter-level offensive tackle play. Between those three, two of them are going to be able to be on the field, I think, and not be too much of a liability. All of this means that you do not have to panic draft, you do not have to panic sign any offensive lineman. Doesn't mean that you have the best offensive line in the NFL, but it means that things are good enough that you can win the Super Bowl, you can go to the playoffs. Things are good enough that you do not have to go out and immediately find a replacement. You do not have to have an emergency draft where you're selecting four offensive linemen. The way that in the 2021 draft, you took so many defensive backs. Now, all of a sudden, your defensive backfield is elite, assuming you can find a second corner because you've got all those cornerbacks that were coming in the same draft. You have Brian Cook, who came in that same draft. So that's part of what this means is that you can sit back in the draft, you can sit back in free agency, and you can say, I'm going to pluck value. If an offensive line, I believe this is what happened with Trey Smith. I think that the Chiefs thought they had their offensive guard play. Maybe they could figure it out. Maybe they were going to be able to get through a season. They got to round 6. Trey Smith was there. Couldn't pass him up at that point. Players will fall in the draft. Players will fall in the draft, and if you are in position to be able to take them, because you do not have a glaring need somewhere else, you get a value pick. Signing Creed Humphrey, it doesn't seem like it, but signing Creed Humphrey frees the Kansas City Chiefs up to be able to constantly value pick offensive linemen, at least for the next 2 years. Would it be nice to have better offensive tackle play? Indeed, it would. Is it necessary? No, I don't think so. So, being able to sit back in next year's draft, being able to take this year and figure out, can one of these three names, Hunter Nourzad, CJ Hansen, and Mike Caliendo, can one of those three names replace Trey Smith? If the answer is yes, then you have quite a bit more football to be had without having to upgrade the interior of the offensive line. It is a great position to be in to be able to have 5 guys, that's basically half of your starting offense, figured out. You've got 7 selections in every draft. I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to have 10-ish picks in this upcoming draft. You're going to be able to sign a couple free agents. If you don't have to do any of those things at offensive line, then you can pack however much you want into figuring out the wide receiver position. You can pack whatever you want into trying to figure out the number 2 cornerback position if that is, in fact, a need after this season. It is what would look like a small signing. You already have Creed Humphrey. All he plays is center. Re-signing him, is it really that big a deal? Well, now you have it figured out before the offseason. Now you have it figured out before the draft. You have it figured out before free agency. You have it figured out before cutdown day. You have it figured out before you have to figure out your practice squad. That's huge for the Kansas City Chiefs. And here, along those lines, is another interesting thing, I think, to look at from this perspective. You've got 3 names at offensive tackle that I think you should be pretty comfortable with starting. Between Wanya Morris, Kingsley Suamataia, and Jawan Taylor. Ethan Driscoll is intriguing. I don't know if he's going to be on the 53. I don't know if he's going to be either on the 53 of the practice squad. I don't think you're getting rid of Ethan Driscoll. Lucas Niang is kind of where is he, right? I would kind of be comfortable getting rid of Lucas Niang in order to give Ethan Driscoll those opportunities if they pop up, because I don't see too much difference between the 2 players. That said, who ends up on your practice squad? Maybe they'll cut CJ Hansen, the 7th rounder, and try to sign him, slip him through the waivers and sign him to the practice squad. Probably, maybe they will. After that, I don't know what offensive tackle you want on your practice squad, because I don't see that from Chuck Godric. I don't see the reason to keep him again. Now, this is interesting heading into the cutdown day. I would look for the Kansas City Chiefs to sign to pluck from the waiver wire any high potential tackle that falls to them. And someone will. That's all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button, because the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about, and I'd love to have you back for the next video.